Dawn came thin and pale over the high plain, the kind of light that did not promise warmth, only exposure. It spread slowly across a failing ranch where fence posts leaned like tired men and the grass had been grazed down to its memory. A single figure stood near the corral, motionless, his breath visible in short clouds that drifted and vanished before they could rise. He had been awake for hours. Sleep no longer arrived when summoned. It came only when exhaustion overruled thought, and even then it left him before morning. The land knew this pattern. It offered no comfort, only continuity. The rancher's coat hung heavier than it once had, not from added layers but from the way he wore it, shoulders curved inward as if bracing against something unseen. His boots were cracked at the seams, patched twice and polished never. He had stopped caring how things looked, focusing instead on whether they still held. That had become his measure of worth. What held was kept, what broke was buried or sold. People, he had learned, fell into both categories, and neither came back once gone. Beyond the fence, the pasture stretched dull brown under the weak sun. Winter had not yet committed, but it circled close, sharpening its knives. The rancher rested his hand on the top rail and listened. Wind moved through wire with a low, constant hum, like a thought that refused to finish. Somewhere farther off, a hawk cried once, then went silent. The place felt emptied, not abandoned, but used up. He understood that feeling intimately. There had been a time when mornings meant purpose, when the sound of hooves in the yard signaled work shared, not endured. That time had ended quietly, without ceremony, the way most losses did. One illness, one winter too long, one grave on a rise where the soil resisted the shovel. Since then the ranch had become an echo chamber. Every task reminded him of what was missing. Every silence confirmed it. He stayed because leaving required imagining a future, and he had learned not to do that anymore. Money was running out in a way that did not announce itself. No sudden debts, just fewer options each month. He sold equipment first, then cattle, then pieces of land no one wanted until someone did. What remained was the house, the barn, and the long habit of waking up anyway. He told himself that was enough. He told himself many things that were almost true. The notice about the horse sale arrived folded inside a supply ledger, slipped in by a clerk who still believed in gestures. A regional auction next county over. Livestock tools, a few horses no one had kept. The rancher read it once, then again later, not because he needed anything but because it gave him somewhere to go that wasn't here. He did not circle any items. He did not plan. He simply folded the paper back into his pocket and left it there like a coin meant for luck. On the morning of the sale, the yard was crowded with voices that carried too far and laughter that ended too abruptly. Horses stood tied in uneven lines, some sleek and restless, others dull-eyed, their ribs speaking plainly through skin. The rancher moved among them without hurry, his gaze untrained in appraisal now, more interested in posture than pedigree. He noticed which animals shifted at shadows, which leaned into touch, which had learned to stand still because resistance cost too much. It was near the far end, where the ground sloped slightly and the dust lay thicker, that he heard the whisper. Not meant for him, but not hidden either. A seller, hat pulled low, speaking to a pair of buyers who had already stepped back. The words drifted on the air and settled where they could not be ignored. Its last rider is in the grave. This one killed him. The sentence carried no drama. It did not need it. It was shaped like a warning and delivered like a fact. The rancher stopped. He did not turn immediately. He felt the weight of the words first, the way they pressed against something already strained. He had heard stories like that before, horses blamed for men's mistakes. Animals turned monstrous by rumor because it was easier than admitting failure. Still, he understood fear, he respected it, it kept people alive. He told himself that was why he waited before looking. When he did, he saw a mare standing apart from the others, her lead rope slack, her head lowered not in submission but in reserve. She was not striking. Her coat was a muted, uneven brown, dulled by dust and neglect. A faint white star marked her forehead off-center as if placed without care. Scars traced her shoulders where old tack had rubbed too long. She shifted her weight carefully, guarding one hind leg, but her eyes, dark and watchful, tracked movement with an intelligence that unsettled him. The seller noticed his attention and stepped closer, repeating the warning more directly this time, voice lowered out of habit rather than kindness. The rancher listened without interruption. He did not argue, he did not ask for details. He had learned that stories offered too quickly were often rehearsed. Instead, he watched the mare breathe, slow, controlled, as if she had learned that any display invited consequence. Around them bidding rose and fell, names called, numbers shouted. The sale moved on indifferent. The rancher felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the sensation of standing at the edge of a decision he had no right to make. He had no surplus of money, no margin for error, no reason to invite trouble into a life already narrowed by loss. And yet, as the mare lifted her head slightly and met his gaze without challenge or plea, he felt something shift. Not hope, not courage, recognition. The quiet understanding of being judged by the worst moment and surviving it anyway. The bidding for the mare passed without competition, her number called into a thinning circle of interest that never fully formed. The rancher waited until the rhythm of the auction moved on before stepping forward, his hand lifting not with confidence but with finality. The gavel fell quickly, almost relieved, as if eager to be done with her. Money changed hands in silence. No congratulations followed. A few glances did. waited with the kind of curiosity reserved for men who make choices others refuse to explain. Up close, the mare smelled of dust and old sweat, of hay that had been rationed instead of offered. Her hide twitched beneath his approach, not in panic, but in anticipation of something learned too well. He did not reach for her immediately. He stopped at her shoulder and stood there, breathing evenly, letting his presence arrive before his hands did. The space between them felt charged, like a held breath that had lasted years. When he finally touched her neck, his palm was open, his fingers still. She flinched once, then settled, muscles tightening as if bracing for a familiar outcome that did not come. The seller hovered nearby, offering last-minute cautions in a tone that pretended concern. The rancher nodded where courtesy required it, though his attention had narrowed to the mare's subtle movements. He noticed the way her ears tracked sound independently, how one eye watched him while the other scanned the yard. This was not a creature ruled by impulse. This was an animal shaped by vigilance. He loosened the rope instead of tightening it, giving her slack she did not yet trust. The seller frowned at that, as if witnessing a mistake he would not be blamed for. Getting her into the trailer took time. She planted her feet and refused the incline, neck-rigid, nostrils flaring as the dark interior loomed. Others offered advice, suggestions edged with impatience. The rancher waved them away. He stepped back, removed his hat, and waited. Minutes passed, dust settled. Gradually the mare shifted her weight forward, testing the ground. When she took the first step on her own, he did not reward it with force. He stayed where he was, allowing the decision to remain hers. It took nearly an hour before she stood fully inside, trembling but upright. When he closed the gate, her breath came fast, but it came. The drive home was long and quiet. The road cut through stretches of land that looked abandoned but were merely enduring, fields stripped to essentials. The trailer rattled behind him, each bump a question he could not answer. At one stop he checked on her, lifting the flap just enough to see her silhouette steadying itself against the sway. Their eyes met briefly through the slats. He spoke then, not to soothe but to mark presence. Just a few words, low and even. She did not relax, but she listened. At the ranch, dusk gathered early, drawing blue shadows across the yard. He led her into the corral, moving slowly, allowing her to read each intention. The other horses were gone, sold months before. The space was empty, echoing. She circled once, twice, then stopped, uncertain. He unbuckled the lead and stepped back, giving her the gift of distance. She did not bolt. She lowered her head and sniffed the ground, testing the unfamiliar soil as if searching for its history. That night he fed her last. He always had, even when there were others. It was not favoritism, just habit. He placed the hay carefully, spreading it so she would not have to compete with herself. He filled the water trough and watched her approach it, hesitation etched into every step. When she drank, he felt a release he had not expected, something easing in his chest. He leaned against the fence and stayed until the stars emerged, one by one, indifferent to his vigil. Sleep came late and lightly. He woke to small sounds, the shift of hooves, the brush of breath. He did not rise immediately. He lay still, listening, learning the cadence of another life sharing his quiet. In the morning, frost rimmed the trough and the mare stood waiting, ears forward, alert. He did not interpret that as trust. He knew better. Trust was built in increments too small to measure until suddenly it existed. Over the following days, he worked near her without demanding anything. He repaired fencing, mended a gate, cleaned the stall. She watched, sometimes tense, sometimes curious. When he moved too quickly, she stepped away. When he slowed, she edged closer. He spoke rarely, but when he did, his voice remained level, unadorned by expectation. He learned the rhythm of her breathing, the signs of impending panic, the difference between resistance and fear. He adjusted himself accordingly. One afternoon, as clouds gathered low and the air pressed heavy, he noticed her favoring the same hind leg again. He approached with caution and examined it, careful not to corner her. The scar was older than he had thought, poorly healed, the result of strain ignored. The realization settled with weight, damage mistaken for defiance, pain labeled danger. He rested his hand there briefly, feeling the heat beneath skin, the tension coiled deep. She did not kick. She stood rigid but present, allowing the contact as if measuring its cost. That evening, a neighbor rode by and slowed at the fence, eyes drawn to the unfamiliar horse. He called out, voice casual, warning masked as curiosity. The rancher answered simply, "Yes, that one, yes," he'd heard. No, he wasn't worried. The neighbor shook his head and rode on, leaving behind a trail of dust and doubt. The rancher watched him go, then turned back to the mare, who stood quietly, ears flicking at distant sounds. As night settled, the wind rose, carrying with it the low moan of something unsettled. The mare shifted, restless, packing the fence line. The rancher stayed with her, matching her movement from the other side, neither leading nor following, just present. He understood now that the danger others feared was not sudden violence but accumulated harm, pressed into a body until it answered back. Standing there in the dark, he realized the choice he had made at the auction was only the beginning, and that whatever truth lay behind the whisper would eventually demand more from him than patience alone. The first incident happened without spectacle, the way most truths begin, quietly enough to be dismissed. A hired hand came one morning to help reset a section of fence blown down by wind, a young man eager to prove usefulness. He moved too fast, approached the mare from behind without warning, and reached for the halter with confidence he had not earned. She reacted instantly, not with malice but with memory, throwing her weight sideways and knocking him into the dust. He was shaken, bruised, embarrassed more than injured. He stood up swearing, spitting grit, and by noon the story had already changed shape. By evening word had reached town that the killer mare had struck again. The rancher heard it secondhand, carried on the back of a routine supply run, delivered with raised brows and a tone that pretended concern. He did not argue. He did not defend. He returned home with flour and nails and the quiet understanding that rumor moved faster than correction. The mare stood at the fence when he arrived, head low, ears rotating, her posture tight with an anxiety she did not understand but clearly sensed. He rested his forehead briefly against the top rail and exhaled, the weight of inevitability pressing closer. He spoke to the hired hand that night, listened carefully as the young man recounted the moment. There was no anger in his voice, only confusion, pride bruised where bones were not. The rancher asked small questions, precise ones about position and timing. The answers confirmed what he already suspected. This was not a horse that lashed out without warning. This was a horse responding to threat learned through repetition. When the hand left paid and unharmed, the rancher stayed behind, watching the yard darken, feeling the ground shift beneath a belief he had tried not to form. Curiosity began to take on weight. It followed him through his days, tugging at the edges of routine. He found himself noticing details he might once have ignored: the mare's reluctance to be saddled, the way she stiffened at raised voices, even those not meant for her, the scars that told a story of correction applied without understanding. He started to ask questions, first casually, then with intention. He visited the auction yard again under the pretense of returning borrowed tack, listening as men talked when they believed the subject closed. The name of the dead rider surfaced slowly, reluctantly. A man known for pushing limits, praised for getting results others couldn't. His widow lived 2 towns over, quiet since the accident, her grief folded into daily survival. The rancher did not arrive with accusations. He arrived with his hat in his hands and a tone that invited refusal. She studied him for a long moment before speaking, eyes tired but clear. She did not blame the horse. She blamed the schedule, the debts, the pressure to produce more from bodies already strained. She spoke of warnings ignored, of a fall that should have ended work for the day but didn't. The horse had reared when the pain became unbearable. The man had not stood back up. Records told the rest in fragments. A veterinarian's note buried in a ledger recommending rest that was never granted. Payment receipts showing repeated use beyond reasonable limits. Other riders who had refused the mare after brief stints, citing stiffness and unpredictable reactions. None of it proved intent, only negligence. But negligence, the rancher knew, was often the most dangerous force of all, wearing the disguise of normalcy until damage became unavoidable. As he gathered these pieces, resistance grew. A trader he questioned laughed it off, warned him not to dig where the soil might cave. A fence post was loosened one night, the wire sagging by morning, not enough to cause harm, just enough to signal awareness. The rancher repaired it without comment, though his sleep grew lighter, his listening more acute. The mare sensed the shift as well, packing more often, her muscles tight as if bracing for the return of something she recognized but could not name. One afternoon, while brushing her down under a sky heavy with low clouds, he noticed how she leaned subtly into the strokes that avoided her injured leg, how her breathing eased when pressure stayed gentle. He realized then that the story told about her had traveled without context, stripped of cause, simplified into something easy to fear. The truth was more complex and therefore less convenient. Complexity demanded accountability, and accountability demanded witnesses willing to stand still long enough to see. The town did not welcome complexity. Whispers hardened into warnings. He was told, indirectly at first then plainly, that pursuing this line of thought would not end well. The trader's reach extended farther than the rancher had assumed, into feed suppliers, transport routes, even local offices that preferred not to reopen closed matters. Each conversation ended with the same unspoken question: why risk what little you have for a horse already condemned? The rancher asked himself that question in the long hours before dawn, standing at the fence, watching the mare move through shadows. The answer came not as a declaration but as a recognition. He had spent years accepting loss as inevitable, believing endurance was the same as virtue. But here was a living being bearing the weight of a lie, her future decided by convenience and silence. To walk away now would not preserve him. It would confirm what he feared he had become. The decision did not arrive fully formed. It gathered shape slowly in the careful stacking of facts, in the quiet resolve to speak plainly when the moment demanded it. He began organizing what he had learned, copies of notes, dates, statements offered without coercion. He understood the imbalance he faced. Truth rarely arrived with authority. It had to be carried, sometimes clumsily, by those willing to absorb the consequences. On the night the wind rose hard enough to rattle the barn doors, he found the mare standing still in her stall, eyes reflecting lamplight, her breath steady despite the noise. He rested a hand on her neck, feeling the strength beneath scar and strain, and knew then that whatever came next would not be about proving innocence alone. It would be about choosing whether silence or compassion would define the end of this story. and whether he was prepared to stand where the truth would finally demand daylight. The meeting was held in the small courthouse at the edge of town, a building that smelled of old paper and sun-warmed wood, where truth often arrived already tired. Light filtered through tall windows clouded by dust, settling in pale bars across the floor. The rancher stood near the back at first, hat in his hands, listening as routine matters were addressed, his presence unnoticed. Outside, tied to the rail beneath a cottonwood stripped nearly bare, the mare stood quietly, her head low, her patience worn thin by waiting but intact. When her name was finally spoken, it carried the weight of accusation without the dignity of evidence. The trader spoke first, confident, voice smooth with practice, repeating the familiar story as if repetition could substitute for fact. He painted a picture of an uncontrollable animal, a danger passed along reluctantly, a tragedy no one could have foreseen. Heads nodded. The story fit what people already believed, and belief required less effort than reconsideration. The rancher stepped forward only when invited, his boots sounding too loud in the sudden quiet. He did not raise his voice, he did not gesture, he spoke the way he worked, with economy, laying each piece down carefully so it could not be dismissed as impulse. He described the mare's condition, the injuries documented, the patterns observed. He read from the veterinarian's note, the words measured, clinical, impossible to dramatize. He named dates, not emotions. He recounted the widow's testimony without embellishment, honoring her restraint by matching it. Murmurs moved through the room, the sound of unease finding purchase. The trader interrupted, questioned relevance, scoffed at conclusions drawn by a man with too much time and not enough sense. The rancher waited until the interruption spent itself, then continued. He presented receipts, work logs, statements from riders who had refused the mare long before the accident. None of it accused, all of it illuminated. The picture that emerged was not of a killer horse, but of a system that demanded more than bodies could give, then shifted blame when those bodies failed. The moment that changed the room arrived quietly. The rancher asked permission to bring the mare forward. There was hesitation, concern for safety voiced out of habit. He agreed to keep her outside, visible through the open doors. When she came into view, sunlight catching the scars along her flank, she did not rear or strain. She stood, breathing evenly, her presence an answer to every exaggerated claim. The contrast between rumor and reality settled heavily. Questions followed, sharper now, directed at the trader. His answers grew shorter, less certain, details blurred where they should have aligned. Silence stretched after one response too many failed to satisfy. The judge leaned back, fingers steepled, gaze fixed not on the rancher but on the gaps left by convenience. A decision was not announced dramatically. It was delivered with the calm authority of inevitability. Responsibility assigned, practices condemned. The mare's record amended, her name cleared of violence. Outside, the rancher rested a hand on her neck, feeling the tremor of energy she had held through the ordeal. The crowd dispersed slowly, conversations muted, some eyes avoiding his, others meeting it with something like respect. The trader left without speaking, his confidence diminished not by confrontation but by exposure. Justice, when it arrived, did not shout. It simply remained standing when the noise moved on. In the weeks that followed, the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Repairs were made with intention, not urgency. The mare's injured leg was given the time it had long been denied, progress measured in inches rather than miles. The rancher worked alongside her, adjusting his expectations to match her capacity, discovering that patience yielded a different kind of strength. He named her then, choosing a word that spoke of endurance rather than redemption. The mornings changed. The same pale light crept over the land, but it no longer felt accusatory. He rode her slowly, at first bareback, their movements tentative, a conversation in progress. Each ride ended before strain could take hold. Trust accumulated quietly, the way frost formed overnight, unseen until it covered everything. The rancher found himself sleeping more deeply, waking with purpose that did not feel borrowed from the past. Sometimes people stopped by under the guise of business, curious to see the horse that had been spared. They spoke differently now, their caution edged with humility. The rancher answered questions when asked, but he did not lecture. The lesson was not his to enforce. It lived in the mare's steady gait, in the absence of fear where fear had been expected. One evening, as the sun dropped low and turned the fields a faded gold, he led her to the rise where the land opened wide. He dismounted and stood beside her, both of them facing the horizon, the wind moving through grass and mane alike. The place felt less empty than it once had, not full but honest. He understood then that redemption rarely arrived as a reward. It came as a responsibility accepted and carried forward. The mare lowered her head and breathed out, a long, unguarded sound, and the rancher rested his hand against her shoulder, feeling the life there, unbroken despite everything done to it. The story others had told about her would fade with time, replaced by quieter truths only those who stayed would know. He turned back toward the ranch, leading her home at an unhurried pace, aware that what they had reclaimed together was not just innocence, but the courage to refuse easy lies even when the cost of truth demanded everything he still had. Hello horse lovers! Before leaving to the video, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss a future upload.